If this is your first or second time here, hope you enjoy your stay. If this is your third time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on when we upload. No idea why I keep saying we. It's only me here. The Brotherhood of Steel, one of the most legendary groups in the entirety of Fallout. My favorite faction out of all of them. Which you wouldn't really figure with the way I seem to kill them in every one of my playthroughs of most of my Fallout runs. They are my favorite faction for the simple reason of they're so much different than any of the other post-apocalyptic factions from other media I've ever come across, right? People in significant power armor, wielding laser weapons and heavy weapons, going with an archaic style of ranking and speech. You know, it seemed like a bunch of fantasy mixed in with science fiction, and I just loved it. Now, the Brotherhood started on the West Coast around the time the bombs fell, right? Some say a little before, some say a little after. Any which way, Roger Maxson was a military officer working at the, I think, Mariposa, chemical weapons research lab. It was a military base with a it was a chemical lab using a military base as a cover. They were using American soldiers and prisoners of war to test the forced evolutionary virus. And when Roger Maxson learned of this, he and his troops didn't take kindly to that. So they pretty much had a military court deal and just decided to execute all of the scientists there. They also sent out over open airwaves, yeah, we did this. We know what you were doing, so fuck you, to the United States government, and no one responded. No one responded because the world had pretty much ended by that point, right? So over time they learned of this, you know, they established the Brotherhood of Steel, pretty much the remnants of the United States military. 76 says that, I guess, Roger Maxson in the original chapter, the founding chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, sent all the information out over the airwaves on, you know, their principles, their creeds, their tenets, what they had to abide by, and their laws and whatnot, so that other chapters could be established elsewhere without needing direct intervention from the founding chapter. Which I guess is where the Steel Rain DLC for Fallout 76 comes in. Any which way, the West Coast Brotherhood of Steel was the first and the most prominent Brotherhood of Steel chapter really ever. They came up with the laws, they came up with their way of life at that point, but they never wanted to be a governing body. They just wanted to safeguard what was left of the world from rogue technology that could destroy the world again. Mind you, that became a bastardized view of keep all significant technology from everybody, as it does over the course of like 200 years. One of the big things, though, is there were different splinterings of the Brotherhood of Steel over the years. One such splintering led to a group of, well, Brotherhood members pretty much being told to fuck off, go into the Midwest, find technology, make sure the super mutants are trying to rebuild their unity or whatever the fuck. Pretty much stay out of the hair of the founding chapter. You know, here's a bunch of airships, fuck off, right? So they did. They took the airships, they went east. They passed over the, what mountain range here? Just looked it up. They went down not too far past the Rocky Mountains. I guess a storm blew in when they were crossing, took out most of the smaller airships, battering them against the mountains, and eventually forcing down their mothership, so to speak, somewhere in the Midwest. Now, when this last airship went down. Many members of the Brotherhood that were amongst, well, what was left at that point, died in the process. Quite a few survived in the wreckage, and to the amazement of the survivors, it said that a very large super mutant by the name of Brute, if memory serves me correctly, saved members of the Brotherhood from the wreckage. So much so that they went back and helped more people from the wreckage, time and time again. This simple act softened the hearts of the survivors of the Brotherhood that, hate mutants and see them as abominations. It made them realize that most mutants were forced into this, and that deep down, quite a few of them are still just people. So they started letting in not just outsiders, but ghouls and super mutants into the ranks of the Brotherhood. After all, they needed to replenish their ranks, especially since they were stranded in foreign territory at this point, with pretty much nothing to show for it. Their mothership gone, very little personnel, so they established the Midwest chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, we don't really hear much about the Midwest chapter. I'm fairly sure Tactics is based their whole to-do about a supercomputer making robots or something. I think it might be a Zax supercomputer called, Calculator something. Making a robot army. Brotherhood couldn't stand for that shit, because why would they? You destroy it, there's multiple endings to the game, right? Any which way, it pretty much shows that the Brotherhood comes out on top, as they always do. One of the strange things about the Midwest chapter after that point is that, unlike the other chapters of Brotherhood of Steel that just kept to themselves, pretty much being a nanny state when it came to technology, the Midwestern Brotherhood, they pretty much became a military state. They pretty much established a military government there. They controlled settlements, they imposed law, they acted as the region's primary authority and lawgivers and lawkeepers and adjudicators and whatever else you want to call them. They were very similar to the NCR, or Caesar's Legion, dependent on how you want to look at it, faction-wise. But they ruled over the Midwest. They recruited wastelanders, tribals, ghouls, super mutants, anybody that was willing to fight for them and keep the peace, they were okay with. And as such, they became, quite frankly, on par with the NCR and Caesar's Legion, right? They held a region of the United States like they did. And, along with that, they established, well, their knights and their paladins became the police force, pretty much. There was a dispute, somebody in power armor was going to show up to fucking fix the problem, right? That's what the Midwestern Brotherhood did. The huge thing, though, is even though they held a region of the United States, like Caesar's Legion held the Southwest, and the NCR held the West Coast, and later the Brotherhood of Steel may have held the East Coast. It's kind of up in the air. It's said that Lions maybe held the East Coast as like a government for a while, but then Maxim said pretty much no. It's a whole strange to-do with them. But there's no doubting that this region of the United States was held by the Brotherhood of Steel, which makes it so very strange that they're just never mentioned again. Yeah, sure, some people say that the game's not canon or whatever. I say everything that's made as a Fallout game is canon until specifically stated otherwise in the games, right? After all, the Pridwin's an airship, and the Brotherhood had airships before, so it makes sense that they would have airships, right? Now, the Midwest isn't really someplace that is talked about because, let's face facts here, the Midwest in the United States, as of right now, is kind of just forgotten about anyway. Well, the vast majority of the United States is just forgotten about if it's not a city, right? So, It's understandable why they didn't focus on it and why they're not really calling back too much to the Midwest. But there are some different things we can try to infer about this lack of information floating around. Right? They were a colossal government at that point. So what could have happened is maybe infighting. The Brotherhood's known to fracture every now and again. Maybe this sect of the Brotherhood fractured and there was a civil war. It makes sense. It happened in history. It could happen there too. Right? Especially if one group decides they want to use technology for one reason and the other decides they don't want to. There you go. You got a schism and you got a civil war. Right? Maybe they just slowly collapsed over time. That one's less likely, especially since they started uniting everybody under the banner of the Brotherhood at that point. Humans, ghouls, super mutants, anyone that was willing to contribute to their society was welcomed, which is pretty cool. Maybe they're just still out there. Maybe they haven't talked about the Midwest Brotherhood because the Midwest Brotherhood is still existing just fine without too much of a problem. Right? Maybe it's just a loose affiliation of city-states that all fall under the banner of the Brotherhood of Steel now. Kind of like, what the fuck was that game? Wasteland, I think? With, like, the Rangers or something. They acted as, like, the police force, but every settlement was, like, somewhat independent, but still beholden to the law of the Rangers. Could be something like that. Maybe they completely retconned it and the Midwest is giant and a giant irradiated wasteland for as far as the eye can see. Maybe it's an entire desert now, right? Maybe the radioactive rain and fucking mini nuclear winter followed by the nuclear summer, which would have scorched all plant life to high hell. Maybe it just turned it into a giant dust bowl again. Radioactive dust storms everywhere, right? That could also be a thing that they decided on. Maybe the Midwest wasn't hit at all. Maybe, again, I was rewatching Jericho recently, and they talk about air patterns and jet stream patterns and how some places just wouldn't be touched by fallout should bombs and stuff fall. Maybe large portions of the Midwest are just kind of untouched by the fallout, right? Maybe it's a paradise. Maybe it's a paradise surrounded by extremely irradiated wasteland, so no one ever goes there. Who knows what they try to come up with. Until further notice, though, I'm going to go with the Midwest Brotherhood of Steel is still the governing body there. That's just continuing to exist. Maybe, like I said, city-states with lawlessness in between, but that way it keeps with the Fallout style and aesthetic, but shows that they have actually held together. Kind of like what the Enclave does. It'd be interesting to see. Although one of the major things I would like to see is if the Midwestern Brotherhood is still around and still acting as a government for the Midwest, what their view on the West Coast Brotherhood would be. Since the West Coast Brotherhood was pretty much reduced down to the chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel we see in Fallout New Vegas. And the East Coast Brotherhood has taken its zealotry to new heights, with Arthur Maxson being the elder of that chapter. I don't know if they still have high elders in the Brotherhood anymore. For those of you that didn't know, the Brotherhood of Steel has a strange hierarchy where each chapter has an elder, and that's like the final say type deal. They make the decisions. The head paladin, head scribe, and head knight carry out those decisions by divvying that information up to whomever they decide is worthy of carrying it out. It's called like the chain of command or something. But each chapter is beholden to the head chapter or the founding chapter, Once it was moved, I don't think it's the founding chapter anymore. I think it's just the head chapter. And the person that leads the head chapter, if memory serves me right here, is the High Elder. The High Elder is the elder that dictates what the other elders can and cannot do. They're like the king of the Brotherhood of Steel, right? And for the longest time, it was only Roger Maxson and his descendants that were the High Elders of the Brotherhood of Steel, which is why I'm surprised that Arthur Maxson, his descendant, hasn't been proclaimed the High Elder. Unless there's already a High Elder somewhere else. Hell, maybe the High Elder's in the Midwest, right? It would make sense for the High Elder of the Brotherhood of Steel to be in the seat of power of the Brotherhood of Steel, which would pretty much be the country that they run in the Midwest. It would also explain where they got a lot of the resources to create and upkeep the Prydwen. Sure, after the events of Fallout 3, there was a bunch of tech that the Enclave no longer needed anymore, but this only takes place, like, what, a decade after Fallout 3? We meet McCready in Fallout 4, so yeah, like a decade at most. We talking post-war, they don't really have, like, established factories or anything, or industrialization to help them anymore. So a ship like the Prydwen would be very hard to make for the DC chapter alone. So maybe help from the Midwest chapter that already knew what the fuck they were doing with airships. Maybe they created a new version of it. Maybe that new version was created using components from the Midwest shipped to the East Coast and built, so they could see how well it was going to work before creating a fleet of them for the Midwest. Who knows? This is all conjecture. I've just been wondering, one, why that entire area of the United States hasn't really been touched on yet. And two, when I did look more into it, why they don't really talk about it more, right? The Brotherhood of Steel is pretty much Bethesda's poster child for their favorite faction. So why don't they show them off more in all of their glory as like, hey, look, the NCR rose and fell, and the Caesar's Legion ripped itself apart, and every other wannabe country that's come up has just died off, but the Brotherhood of Steel is still there, right? It would make the most sense. At least in my book, it would make the most sense. Not to mention, didn't it show in... I'm trying to remember back to the Fallout show now. Didn't they show the Prydwen in one scene? And the Fallout show takes place on the West Coast, which means the Prydwen would have to go from the East Coast to the West Coast if this is set after Fallout 4. If the show is. Or maybe the Prydwen is just what they call that line of airship? Because the original airships the Midwestern Brotherhood used, well, the West Coast Brotherhood used, before they became the Midwestern Brotherhood, were like normal Zeppelin-style gondolas under the like air gas bag thing. I don't know what it's called. I'm not an airship expert. But the Prydwen, on the other hand, is... you can walk around in the top of it, where you'd figure the gas for buoyancy would be. Strange thing. Maybe the Prydwen is just a designation for the type of airships. Like T-45 is a designation for power armor, and X-01 is a designation for power armor. Maybe Prydwen's just a designation for airship, because it would need to go the entire width of the United States to get from Boston to the West Coast the way it was. So that's something to think about. Unless, again, it was made in the Midwest, in which case it could have been anywhere between like the Rocky Mountains to like Chicago is where it could have been made, right? I don't know. It's something to think about, because no one's even talked about it in God knows how long. I'd personally just like to see them do something with it, maybe flesh it out a little bit more. Who knows? Just who knows? Anyway, thanks for listening to me meander about a topic on Fallout again. Thanks for watching if you did. I'm gonna, I don't know, figure out the next one to do, I guess. Anyway, see you in the next one.